So this isn't directed at anything or anyone specifically, but sometimes I see concerns about how the characters within shows and their actions may be considered problematic. Or I've seen some people argue that if you enjoy a show or a character that has bad behaviors, that means that you must agree with said behavior. Or people will say that the author is an unethical person because the protagonist is an unethical person. While I understand that sometimes it's difficult to separate fiction from reality, given the pervasiveness of some tropes, I think that that is too much a black and white way of examining media and what people take away from it. And other times, I will see people who are mad at characters for being flawed. I've encountered this in response to my own writing, but I've also seen this with other TV shows. And to be honest, it's really annoying. It's annoying for like so many reasons, because sometimes these conversations, they lack nuance. I've seen a lot of these adult-oriented shows get criticized for problematic tropes in storytelling in a way that makes me feel like the critic forgets that the audience is supposed to be for adults, not children. I mean, it's fine, I guess, to want moral lessons from what you read, what you watch, what you play, but why are you using that to judge the work as a whole? I'm confused. Like, there are people that come at the show You, for example, with some seriously puritanical energy that I don't really ever remember happening to Dexter, a show with a similar premise. He's just not stalking and killing women. Besides that, like, the purpose of You is to illustrate how abusive and sociopathic men can infiltrate the lives of others, continuously fail upwards thanks to a lack of care or concern, and just in general receive passes in society. He's a character that you can empathize with to a certain extent, but he's a complete piece of shit person that is no way meant to be redeemable, nor does the show make him out necessarily to be redeemable. And other times I've noticed how, like with kids' shows, maybe they're not very critically discussed, or they're not critically discussed enough, and a lot of problematic stuff just gets swept under the rug. Like in this other video, for example, I talked a lot about how the villains in kids' shows who do egregiously bad things often are forgiven or redeemed too easily and face very little consequences, if any consequences. I also see how some people can idolize problematic characters in a way that takes it way too far. Like sometimes people don't understand the purpose of a problematic character and what themes their arc or messages that their arc is meant to illustrate. I've also seen people refer to villains as their comfort character and praise them as someone who can do no wrong, that's weird. I mean, like, I can understand relating to a villain and empathizing with them. It's the whole, this character who actually committed murder and is wonderful and has no flaws is more than a little concerning.
Why? It's just a joke.
Yeah, but sometimes it's not, and people actually mean it that way. And if you try to call them out on it, they get very, very upset. Oh, and like another big problem. So there's this huge demand for wholesome stories, which is great, but then there are people within the wholesome communities that vehemently despise and hate on anything that has to do with darker themes, which is deeply, deeply frustrating. So overall, what I wanted to do in this video, there's a lot of different ideas and concepts and things and in culture, I think, that I've brought up here. But what I wanted to do overall was talk about problematic characters, their portrayals, and how they may help or harm our perception of relationships and interacting with others. Beyond that, I wanted to talk about how important it is for us to have flawed or even problematic characters. So, possible spoilers ahead for the following shows. I've got a broad list here of things that I'm going to be running down in my examples list, including Bojack Horseman, Harley Quinn, Rick and Morty, F is for Family, She-Ra, and Breaking Bad. These are the most prominent ones that I'm going to be exploring today. So I think that the biggest issue that I've seen in this whole moralistic debacle about, is it good to portray problematic characters? Is it bad to portray problematic characters? Is it good for you to like them? Is it bad for you to like them? The biggest problem that I think I've seen in this whole conversation is that audience members will tend to equate protagonist with hero, but that is not true. A protagonist does not necessarily equate to being a hero. The protagonist is simply the leading or main character in a story, which means that that character can be anyone, even a villain, if the writer wanted them to be. That means that this character does not have to ascribe to a certain set of morals, good or bad. And in fact, they can be morally neutral, they can be an anti-hero in the sense that they serve their own interests or they have moral complexes. All of those are valid ways for a character to, live their lives or go about their behaviors throughout the story, so to speak. So, for example, Harley Quinn is the protagonist of her own show, but she is not a hero. I would even argue that she's more of an anti-hero because she has a complex set of morals and doesn't really answer to anyone other than herself. At the same time, though, she's not so villainous that she lacks empathy for others. She has a lot of care for people in her group. She, of course, loves Poison Ivy. She, her complicated relationship with the Joker, she definitely holds empathy and love for him, even though he doesn't deserve it. The core thing about the protagonist is that they have to, in some way, no matter how small, be a sympathetic character, meaning that they have to be able to connect with their audience on an emotional level. They can be as flawed or as perfect as they want to be, but if we can't relate to them, they cannot carry the show. Think about it. Would you tune in week after week to see someone just be a trash person, not experience any growth, and not be relatable in any way whatsoever? Chances are not enough people are willing to do that. While we can recognize how egregiously awful Harley's actions are, she is a mass murderer, and on top of that is fairly selfish, we empathize with her because of the abuse that she suffered at the hands of the Joker and her unrequited love for Poison Ivy and that whole struggle that she has. Harley is flawed, problematic, and in many ways unworthy of redemption. But as viewers, we still care about her story. We care a lot. So if you go into a show expecting protagonist good, antagonist bad, you're arguably stripping away some of that world's complexity and unfairly judging the work of the writers. Harley Quinn doesn't shy away from the fact that Harley is a flawed, problematic protagonist. Her bad actions are played up for laughs, that's definitely true, but that's the point of her character after all. Harley tries to learn to be better, but at times she still falters. In the show, as in real life, it takes us a while to unlearn problematic behaviors, and sometimes Harley winds up making the same mistakes over and over again. Now, is there harm in portraying a character without acknowledging their problematic behaviors? I think that is true to an extent. You could contribute to normalizing actions that are harmful towards others. Hypothetically, think of a situation where a character is maybe abusive or controlling towards their romantic partner, but their partner always forgives or agrees with them in the end. I mean, that's gross, right? That's not the kind of thing that we want to see. And historically, when it comes to domestic violence or sexual assault situations, we undermine the severity of it or we play it up for laughs or drama. That is the kind of problematic writing that I personally despise. You're not adding anything of value to the story, you're just hyping up the drama in the most bare minimum way possible, or worse, you're undermining a serious issue. That's not to say that a show shouldn't ever write about these things, but it has to be careful and deliver it with nuance and sensitivity. I remember, for example, when Game of Thrones was on and people were upset about how the series relied on sexual assault for a lot of the narratives and a lot of the kind of character turning points, and it was pretty bad. From what I watched of Game of Thrones, it was bad. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't ever be able to discuss rape or sexual assault in your story. Other shows have handled it quite sensitively and delicately, such as Sex Education and Unbelievable. So before criticizing a show that's addressing a controversial topic, you also might want to consider what kind of new perspective it's bringing to the discussion of that topic.
What if someone depicts something awful? I get kind of uncomfortable when there's graphic sexual assault. Not triggered, but it's upsetting to watch.
That is a really good question, and you're not alone. Personally, I can't really watch that kind of thing anymore either, but I'm of the belief that you can, as in technically, depict what you want to depict in your story, as long as it's consensual on set, everyone is safe and on board, i.e. not being coerced, threatened, or peer pressured in some way. That to me is okay. But here, my friends, is my caveat. If you're gonna do something like that, you have to consider your audience. There are a lot of people who include those types of scenes exclusively for shock value, or to generate empathy for a character, or to motivate a particular plot point in a character arc. And that can not only be a shallow reason for doing something, but it can alienate your audience. If you're writing a narrative about a woman overcoming sexual assault, for example, your film is most likely geared towards women who have survived the same. But the depiction of the act itself isn't really necessary for this audience. They understand exactly how horrible it is. And if you include that depiction, you run the risk of alienating the audience that the film is made for and potentially attract creeps and weirdos instead. Again, it's not wrong for you to want to include it per se. Jennifer Kent, the director of The Nightingale, included gruesome, violent acts as a means of showcasing the horrors of British colonization in Australia. She didn't want to remove the sexual assault scenes because she was trying to reinforce the ugly brutality of a very frankly whitewashed and undertold history. It's a very difficult film to watch, and I sometimes question exactly how much was needed for this film. I mean, this is a film that makes you physically ill. But nonetheless, I respect her reasons. I respect why she wanted to do it. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say is technically you can do it if you want. I just want people to understand that it might not always be necessary or the right thing for your target audience. And like, if you give a shit about your audience, you might want to take that into account. Okay, so anyways, to get back on track. There is a difference between a character being portrayed as problematic versus one who has problematic behaviors but is not treated as such. There is also a difference between portraying a problematic character who doesn't always succeed versus one who does, such as Rick Sanchez in Rick and Morty. Quick aside here, I need to seriously catch up on Rick and Morty, so take everything that I say with a grain of salt because this is just based off of what I've seen. Here's what I can say. Rick is a problematic protagonist. He is an asshole, but we as an audience can still love and relate to him because he does, in his own flawed way, care about his family. He also struggles with pretty horrible depression and alcoholism. While the show acknowledges that he's an asshole, he is consistently portrayed as the one who is smarter than everyone else, and he's always the one to save the day. He's never wrong. There's always some loophole that he can exploit to escape his bad situation and make the other characters look foolish. Essentially, he can be as horrible as he wants to be and doesn't face a lot of consequences for that. And that's one of the major criticisms that I have seen about his character. That's not just from me, but that's from other sources and other people and other fans of the show have mentioned this about how Rick is kind of an annoying character for this reason, and I kind of agree with it. I think that his frequent successes and his know-it-all behavior can sometimes undermine the empathy that we have for him or make us forget about the things that make him relatable to us. In contrast, Harley Quinn doesn't succeed every single time. She loses friendships, she struggles with her self-confidence, and she gets her heart broken over and over again. She has to work for what she wants, but beyond that, she has to accept that even if she does, she may not get what she wants. That's the really painful part of her relationship with Poison Ivy. Harley knows that if she truly loves Ivy, she cannot be selfish and insists that Ivy choose her over her own happiness with Kite Man. But a show that does problematic characters really well, and one of my absolute favorite shows, I mean, honestly, it kind of like takes, it arguably takes the #1 spot in my book. Like, I cannot think of a show that like I have watched over and over more and more. It's Bojack Horseman. Bojack Horseman is a problematic protagonist. He has a weak set of morals, he's an unsupportive friend, and he has been known to use his fame and prestige to prey on others. There is literally nothing about Bojack that I can think of that's likable other than that he's snarky and like in the earlier seasons he's like down to do anything with you, but what, even though he's totally unlikable, the show doesn't shy away from portraying Bojack as a problematic character. He fails more often than he succeeds thanks to a combination of his self-hatred, depression, and his hubris. He reaches rock bottom over and over again, and his only triumphs are that he gets to live to see another day. Breaking Bad executes the idea of the problematic character even better, in my opinion. Walter White's pride and his unrelenting desire for power and control is what helps him overcome obstacles while simultaneously creating new ones. His ability to overcome his flaws is what leads to his tragic but ultimately justified demise. Walter White does not succeed over and over again. I understand that he, smiles as he's dying on the floor of the warehouse, but I gotta say, if your goal to go out the way that you want to go out was, I want to die on the floor of a warehouse, I think that you've got to reevaluate yourself, man. The finale of Breaking Bad isn't him magically fixing his mistakes to die a hero's death and blah blah blah, he gets comforted by his family and they cry, everybody cries. No, it's a desperate and pathetic scramble for him to right the wrongs that he has caused, for some meager scraps of closure, which he wouldn't have actually had to do had he just went and repented for his actions. Ultimately, Walter White brings his death upon himself, and this is why his legacy is not meant to be idolized, and why I also feel like the writers did not write him to be idolized at all. Within these discussions, I also think it's important to take into account the intention of the author. Whether that's what the author has explicitly stated about the work, such as in an interview, in an article, in some kind of author's note, or as implied through the text itself. Examining the character's actions and how others react to them, how the character may consistently triumph despite their awful behaviors and attitudes, or how their bad actions are swept under the rug. Looking at whether or not others hold grudges towards a certain character for their behaviors. These are things that can help us understand whether this character is intended to be problematic, and if the show is demonstrating how their problematic behavior leads to further complications, or if it's easily forgiven. Catra is a problematic character who, despite the fact that she has caused immense destruction and pain, garners a lot of sympathy from her audience. The writers demonstrate that she is problematic and self-destructive, but in the final season, I feel like her redemption arc is a bit too rushed, or that the characters forgive her too easily for egregiously bad actions, which, by the way, involve getting someone's mother killed. This is where I feel the portrayal of a problematic character somewhat falters and can potentially be more harmful, especially depending on the audience. I talk more extensively about my thoughts and feelings regarding her redemption arc in this video here, if you're interested in hearing more. I see concerns arise in regards to how a villain or a problematic protagonist behaves during a show, and as a writer, it frustrates me when people are upset that a character is either doing things that are ethically or morally wrong when there are pressures or concerns that are influencing their decisions. Sometimes characters, as in real life, have to make bad decisions in order to protect someone or themselves or their larger long-term goals. I still believe that a character should, to some extent, acknowledge those bad behaviors and try to learn from them. That should be a core part of their journey. Ultimately, characters have to have problems. They have to have flaws, not just to make them relatable, but to contribute to the obstacles surrounding the conflict. No one is perfect. If someone was perfect, that would mean that they had the ability to solve their problem instantaneously, and therefore there is no conflict, which means that there is no story. There is something to be said for genres such as slice of life, which don't strictly follow a plot or a conflict from episode to episode. While I feel that that genre is underappreciated and can certainly be seen more in Western mainstream media, ultimately it should not replace our existing methods of storytelling and constructing characters and conflict. It should only exist alongside it. And even in slice of life, there are characters who have deep underlying problems that can perpetuate conflict. While there is no over-the-top action or drama, often there is still this underlying sense of conflict, which makes the show interesting even as the characters go through mundane everyday life. Flaws and problematic characters, to an extent, also have to be genuine or relatable. There are flaws which we perceive to be good ones. For example, martyrdom, the idea that a character is too selfless. Adora from She-Ra, as well as Steven Universe from, Steven Universe, are great examples of this flaw. When it comes to Adora's martyrdom leads to conflicts with her friends and distracts her from one of her ultimate desires, which is to be loved. Her desire to be loved by Catra directly contradicts the series' overarching goal, which is to defeat the Horde through self-sacrifice. Although She-Ra brilliantly explored the flaw of martyrdom, this isn't something that I would want to see replicated over and over again. I mean, can you imagine an entire series filled with characters who are too selfless? Or worse, seeing that replicated across multiple series? We've had it with we've had it with She-Ra, we've had it with Steven Universe. I can't imagine another show coming out to try to pull the whole martyrdom is bad flaw out of their hat here. I really can't imagine that happening. It's just, can you see how that might contribute to a character being annoying, one-dimensional, or even how that could harm the plot? And further, could you relate to multiple characters that can't be bad, once? This is why flaws have to be deeper, why they have to be genuinely bad. They need to serve as an obstacle for preventing a character from reaching their goal. Bojack wants to improve his reputation and be loved by his public just as he once was in the 90s, but his addiction and self-esteem issues prevent him from finding the confidence he so desperately needs to secure that goal. Ultimately, problematic characters deserve a place in our pop culture and media, but only if they are written well. As an audience member, you should try to take the writer's intent into account so that you can understand the work and character better. However, be very careful, that's not the only ways through which you should analyze media. Don't do it. Don't look at a piece of media like Bojack Horseman and be like, Bojack is a morally bad character and therefore the creators of the show are bad. Don't do that.
Stop doing that.
So, arguably, problematic characters are poorly written if their flaws do not prevent them from succeeding, or if other characters will easily overlook their flaws. These specific portrayals can arguably, although not always, be harmful because they contribute to the normalization of abusive behaviors. However, At the same time, I think that you must understand that a writer doesn't serve your self-interests, they serve the interest of the story and characters, or better yet, the numbers, because everyone's got to make that money. Well, what? People gotta eat. A problematic character may still end up succeeding or not being punished for their bad actions because the writer is attempting to demonstrate a harsh reality reflected in our own lives. This is the case with you, and this is also, again, the case with Bojack Horseman. Bojack Horseman took advantage of young women, but ultimately he doesn't go to jail for that. He goes to jail for breaking and entering and nearly drowning in the pool of his former house. His reputation is trashed and everyone knows the truth about him, but it's debatable as to whether or not this actually gives his victims closure. And although in some sense he reaches rock bottom and loses everything, he is still given a small window to succeed again by fully embracing the fact that his reputation is tarnished and by going on that one unicorn show. I forget, okay? I forget what it was. But there's this wonderful and painful complexity that's explored in this, and that's what, in my opinion, makes this show such a masterpiece. Another amazing favorite of mine, F is for Family, focuses on a dad that by today's standards is verbally and emotionally abusive towards his kids. And don't at me in the comment section and argue with me about whether or not he's abusive. We're not here to discuss that. That's not what I'm talking about. Either way, if you interpret Frank as abusive, if you don't interpret Frank as abusive, he has a flawed relationship with his kids. He has a flawed, bad parenting style, and that's impacted his relationships with his children. Okay? So, like, don't do it. So what makes this show brilliant is that we see his attitude start to change, particularly in a decade when being open-minded was arguably difficult. What's amazing about Frank is that he wants to be a good father and husband, but he has anger issues that he's struggling with as a result of his upbringing and PTSD from his service in the Korean War, also known as the Forgotten War in US history. And then he goes to get a job where he is disrespected, belittled, bullied, and he is struggling to take care of his family. This man has got a lot of issues, and none of it justifies his anger towards his kids, but the series doesn't want to make excuses for him. It just portrays him as is. It doesn't take any moralistic high ground for how he's portrayed. He is in many ways a bad or a flawed person, but he doesn't always succeed. And while the show can get us to laugh at some of his anger outbursts, it doesn't minimize the effects that those have on his kids, which are thoroughly explored within the show. His kids have a bad relationship with him, and he has to realize how bad he's been towards them in order to work through his flaws. It's why correct me if I'm wrong, but there was this joke that was very prevalent in the earlier seasons, which is that Frank keeps saying, "I'm gonna put you through the goddamn wall." And it's like this joke where he just jokes about violently throwing his children literally through a wall. And it's very prevalent in the first few seasons, but then it stops. It's pretty much stopped by the end of season 3 and like season 4. He stops making that comment so much because I think he realizes the effect that it's had on his children. And the thing is that we also come to understand that Frank is this way, not just because of his PTSD, not just because of the toxic masculinity perpetuated within the time period that he's grown up in, but also because he was abused himself by his parents when he was a child. He has a flawed relationship with his father, it's haunted him ever since, and it's something that continues to impact his relationship with his kids. So, in my opinion, F is for Family is so valuable because it's this funny yet bittersweet exploration of the effects of generational abuse and trauma, something that I don't think that we see enough in television. So, in conclusion, people, even with horse heads and bodies, are inherently complex. We struggle with our own demons. We encounter situations where we are forced to make complicated moral choices that we may not feel good about. Even if a decision is black and white, out of our own greed or selfish needs, we might choose to make the wrong choice. And that's just life. Even our wildest fantasies are grounded in some kind of reality, and that should be appreciated. And the thing that I love the most about problematic characters, often we go on these wonderful journeys with them. This is more true when the characters' problems mirror our own. And over the course of a handful of episodes or several seasons or chapters or books or games, we learn how they overcome those bad behaviors. And through this, we learn more about ourselves. In fact, we may even be more influenced to address our own problems. And that is a powerful and healing experience. And I'd sign up for that experience every time. Anyways, Thank you all so much for watching this long and rambling and winding video, and I hope that you were able to make heads or tails of what I was saying here and there. But thanks again for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a like, as it really does help the channel out. Also consider subscribing, and when you subscribe, be sure to hit the notifications bell so you get updates on when I upload future episodes. Without further ado, thank you all so much for watching. Bye! I'd like to give a very special shout out and thanks to my patrons: Deep Dive Dylan, D. Roberts, Brian White, Caleb Putnam, Robin Harper, Bob Conway, Cody Webb, Maticus Sama, and Gus Fuss. Thank you all so much.